Great. So today we're going to really dive a little deeper into what sustainability is all about and really try to go through some of the definitions and also the myths and gradually get deeper into the content. I really hope this gives you some idea about what sustainability is, but also some arguments to convince others to join the movement and really implement that more in the future. So that's some info about me. You're very welcome to contact me if you have any questions. And this is your answers. Woohoo! Yeah. So this is your vision of sustainability, folks. So I really love what I am seeing here. So meeting our own needs is a big thing. And I'm imagining without compromising the future is cut a little bit. This is a word cloud, so it's limited in the number of space that we have. I see environmental care here. I imagine business without destructing the environment, resource friendly, running business safely. There's lots of things in Indonesian that I'm not going to risk to read to you. Sorry, but you can see a lot. Ability to sustain, I guess, activity or whatever. Running business safely. We say this, continuity is another important one. Safety. Okay. Trust. I like that. Environmental care. We said that already. Overcome climate change, continuing business, sustain business. So I think we read a lot of stuff about the environment, but we read a lot of stuff about business as well. And that's going to be a big theme today about understanding that we have the environment, but we have business and we have also society. I see here social good for people. So also an important part of sustainability. So you nailed it, guys. You really tackled a lot of the points that we're going to cover today. So sustainability has been defined by the United Nations Brundtland Mission as being meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So it's really a notion that is going across generations. It's not an immediate notion. It's a dynamic notion that has to take into account our own needs and the needs in the future. So there's lots in it because, of course, we have to understand what are our own needs and what are the needs of the future generations at the same. So there's lots of discussion about what sustainability can be because people may have a different perception of the concept, right? Some of the things that are interesting in this definition is that it's already mentioning right away this notion that resources are finite, right? Because if you think that you have needs, you're going to fill them with something, and your future generation will need also to meet their own needs. It means that the resources are not infinite. Otherwise, we wouldn't have to worry about the future, right? So it's putting this limit to resources. Resources should thus be used conservatively, and because again, we have to think of the needs of future generation. We have also this notion of long-term development priorities, which is important. This notion that it's not static; it's a dynamic system, and consideration as well of consequences of resources use as well is important. So, in the simplest terms, sustainability is about the realization of human activity on planet Earth, and it enables the same activity for future generations. So this has led to a few other ideas. So the idea that we want to lead a comfortable life, but at the same time make sure our future generation can do the same. So this is about trying to compromise us not really binging over things ourselves so that our future generation are not going to live in poverty, essentially not having anything. Chief Seattle here has this quote that says, "We do not inherit the earth from our ancestors, we borrow it from our children." This is a really nice say. Indigenous actually thinking has this notion of sustainability embedded in their thinking. This is one of the quotes, but there are other fundamental principles. One is called the seventh generation. So it's a belief that indigenous communities in North America have that you have everything that you do, you have to be sure that 7 generations later, people can still do it. So they had actually really something that's very, very close to the definition we use today of sustainability, right there in their beliefs. So this is leading to a number of concepts, and one of them is the concept of planetary boundaries. So I just want to do a little round here. How many people here know about planetary boundaries? Can you raise your hand, people who know about planetary boundaries? Okay, that's good, that's fine. How many of you know about greenhouse gases? Raise your hand. Greenhouse gases. You don't know greenhouse gases? Okay. Okay, I thought there would be more people to know about them. So can someone tell me what greenhouse gases is? Do you know? I had someone here. So what is a greenhouse gas?
Yeah, it's actually gases that produce um from like it can be from industrial and also maybe forestry. It can affect our planet because it can influence the climate change. So it includes the gases like carbon dioxide,
Yeah.
methane,
Yes, very good, very good.
NOx.
Yes. And what do they
Mhm.
do? What do we call them? Greenhouse gas. What do they do to the climate?
It can increase the temperature.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It can increase the temperature. They have interaction with radiation that will maintain, especially infrared radiation, close to Earth. So it's going to increase the temperature. Exactly. So okay, so some of you know about that. So you will probably know that the constant emission of CO2 in the atmosphere means that we have actually a direct impact on our climate. And now it's been established that human activity is directly impacting the climate at really incredibly high speeds, but because of the release of these greenhouse gas emissions. So greenhouse gas emissions have become a way to talk a lot about sustainability, because people say, okay, we need to have carbon neutral processes. We need to emit less CO2. We need to have less emissions of greenhouse gases. You hear these phrases, right? When we talk about sustainability, because people say, okay, if we want to control climate change, we need to have less of these emissions. But I don't know if you agree with me, but this is only one small part of the problem. I mean, it's already really big, but it's only part of the problem. What about, we heard this morning, your ministry talking about persistent organic pollutants, mercury, microplastics. These are not emissions of greenhouse gases, right? And yet we need to consider them for sustainability as well. So this framework is important, but it's not sufficient, right? Sustainability is about more things. So this is why people develop this notion of planetary boundaries. So in planetary boundaries, what we say is that there are 9 major areas in which you need to look in order to have a sustainable activity. One of them is climate change here. So this is directly related to these emissions I was talking about earlier. But you have 8 others: novel entity, stratospheric ozone depletion, atmospheric aerosol loading, ocean acidification, biochemical flows, which centers on nitrogen and phosphorus, freshwater use, land system change, and biosphere integrity or biodiversity. So these are so planetary boundaries. For those of you who've never heard about this is just now a framework that people use in order to talk about all the different dimensions of how humans impact the environment and areas in which we need to look into to have a more sustainable activity. So if you want to read more about this idea was developed about 10 years ago. The first paper appeared in Science. It's what you have here. And more recently, there was an update that was published last year in which we actually see what the impact is. So the way you use this planetary boundaries is essentially for each of these corners here. If you're in the green, it means you're okay. But if you go beyond the green, it means you are going over the capacity of the planet to absorb that activity, to absorb that extra thing that is generated, right? So where you see red color or purple color, it means high risk zone. So it means humans are going too far, going too crazy about this. So I'm not going to go into a lot of details, but I have added some definitions for you guys on some of these concepts. So if you, when you want to go back onto these slides and read them carefully, you can actually learn a bit more about them. In particular, for instance, novel entities here, which I find really interesting. It's a bunch of things that people have added there, including the release of synthetic chemicals and substances such as microplastics, endocrine disruptors, organic pollutants. So you recognize here again the things that were discussed this morning by your ministers. Also, anthropogenically mobilized radioactive materials, including nuclear waste and nuclear weapons, and also interesting human generated biological species such as genetically modified organism as well, because it's recognized that they can have an effect as well on the environment. So this is what we call the novel entities, and this is one area where there's lots of discussions and lots of uncertainties as well, because they're novel and we're still trying to figure things out. Another important one is the geochemical flows. So this is how people use nutrients such as nitrates or phosphates in order to grow food, grow agricultural crops. And one of the issues with them is that they can be released in the environment and cause disturbances such as eutrophication, so algae blooms and things like that. So this is a big area of concern. You can see here that the numbers are really not good. The colors are not good. So there's lots of work. So again, the take-home message is that if you know about greenhouse emissions, CO2 emissions, or carbon neutrality in general, this is really important, but there are other things as well to consider. What's really challenging in this area is that since again these ideas have been developed, you can see that there's an acceleration of the fact that humans are breaking these bonds, breaking these different barriers, and now we consider that 9 boundaries were assessed, but 6 were crossed. So 6 areas we're not doing it, and we need to do better. Other things that are sort of related to that, but also seen through a different lens, is looking at where are these breaking of the planetary boundaries coming from? And this is coming from socio-economic activities that we humans have. So, for instance, we are polluting, contaminating, or releasing waste in different ways, and that's completely correlated with the fact that we have a growing population. So you can see here that from 1950s in particular, which is marked here by this dashed line, you can see an explosion of the number of humans in the population. Also, a huge development of economic growth through the GDP at a global scale. But you can see as well that this means that urban population raised, primary energy use went up, fertilizer consumption went up, paper production went up, water use went up. Large dams have been hugely developed, transportation, telecommunications, and now international tourism, as all of this is really going up. And all of these things are linked to some of these planetary boundaries that we discussed earlier. So by increasing customer demands, pushing consumption, we are actually demanding more and more resources and actually tasking our planet more and more. So where we are right now is in a space in which economy, society, and environment are mostly decorrelated. So people view them separately. They will say, oh, there's the environment over here. There's a society over here. There's the economy on this other side, and they don't talk to each other. And we see many, many examples of that. I mean, I was having really interesting conversation over lunch with one of your deans who was telling me that the industry minister and the environment minister here, they're not talking to each other in Indonesia. Don't worry, in Quebec, in my province, it's the same. There was a report on the news this week about how they did, we have a big battery plant that is being built in close to Montreal, and there are releases of how there was miscommunications between the Minister of Environment and the Minister of Industry. So it's the same story. We all have the same thing. And that's really coming from this. There's a disconnect between economy and environment. So this means that often the way we're trying to solve them is also very focused. We're going to try to solve the question of education, or we're going to try to solve the question of building a plant here to boost the economy, or we're going to say, okay, we're going to protect this forest here. But what is the implication of that for one another, and how can we have a more integrated and holistic approach? This vision does not allow to do that. It does not allow to think about economic development, social needs, and environmental protection in an integrated way. So one of the ways with which people have been trying to solve this is by creating this concept of the triple bottom line. So this idea that the economy, the society, and the environment should overlap. And at this point of overlap, this is where we can develop these solutions. So a number of companies have actually started to do this, right? There are some companies that are now integrated performance measures that are integrating their economic performance, but also their social performance and the environmental performance together to try to start to do this, to integrate these concepts together. A number of major companies now have, for instance, sustainability officers that are actually doing this job of looking into the triple bottom line and trying to report this way. Obviously, it's still early stages and there needs to be more work that is done in this way, but this is probably the way to go. What we need to be is actually probably going even deeper than that and understanding that the economy is only a part of society. Society also includes our culture, music, theater, enjoying life together, having families, having, like everything that we love about life is a part. The economy is just a small part of it, right? And within society as well, we have to understand that society itself is only a small part of the entire environment, and we are integrated in a much bigger system than us that contains the air we breathe, food we eat, the environment in which we enjoy to relax and to have fun. So this particular concept is probably where we want to go, but I think we're still far from doing that. We need to work more and more to try to integrate all of these concepts together. So now what we're going to do is go across a few notions of around sustainability to try to demystify sustainability. So sustainability is actually not just about the environment, and we started to touch upon this a little bit. One view of this whole problem is to imagine that on the one end, you have the economy that is here somewhere in the sky, and that it takes its resources from the environment, it's going to dump waste into the environment, but there's no connection between them. Of course, this vision is wrong, right? We all know that the economy is completely embedded inside the environment. Plant here is not happening out of vacuum. It's actually happening within the environment, potentially resulting in destruction locally, pollution locally, but also creating revenues, creating activity for people locally as well. So there's good and bad, but it is integrated inside society. So if you have this view, you're not understanding sustainability. Sustainability is about having a healthy economy and having people around who have a happy life and also an environment that can sustain. So you really need to have this high standard of doing everything together. So sustainability includes a wide range of social and economic development issues, and poverty, hunger, health, education, climate change, water sanitization, energy, and the environment all are part of sustainability. So we need to really integrate that together. And I think this is also important from a political message idea too, because when we go and talk about sustainability to our politicians, to people working in industry, people will often say, "Oh, this is the environment. It's not that important." But if you really come back and say, "No, but it's our lives, it's our livelihoods, it's our families, it's our kids, it's our education, it's how people are poor," it's actually easier to relate to these notions and really link them much better. So I think that there's really a strong political message as well behind this notion. So what we need is to make sure that everybody has access to their essential needs, including food, water, energy. So clearly, technology, healthcare, political structure within society are involved in sustainability, and they need to be called upon to develop a better future. And this is some of the things that have been developed through the Sustainable Development Goals. So I saw that you have a beautiful pin, my friend, about the Sustainable Development Goals, and several of you have similar artifacts. So this is a notion that is really being pushed now across a number of countries around the globe, because they're really, I think, hit two really important points about sustainability being about all of these three ideas: the environment, the society, and economy, handled together and understood as a holistic set of parameters for attaining sustainability. So sustainability as well is not exactly the same as green. So we're talking a little bit invariably about green chemistry, sustainable chemistry, sustainability. I do the same, right? I use these terms a little bit invariably, but in the context of this course, I think it's important to understand that they're a little bit different and they are going through different kinds of concepts. So in general, green is a little bit of an older concept that's sustainable. In fact, green chemistry, the word green chemistry was invented 25 years ago. At that time, we were not really using sustainability as the way to phrase those things. It tends to be related to very specifically not causing harm to human health and the environment. So it's a more restricted, I think, definition to sustainability. It is one that is often assumed to mean natural in the public discourse. Although, again, there's a bit more to green chemistry if you look at the definition. What is missing in green chemistry, for instance, that does not contain the sustainability aspects, this notion of future generation. In green chemistry, we really try to look at a process, make it greener, but don't really look at the dynamic implication for future, the resources in the long term. So I think this is where I would put the nuance. Sustainability, again, overlaps with green because you need to have a green process to make it sustainable. But I think this notion of preserving the resources for the next generation is really what makes it a little bit different. So an example is that, for instance, genetically modified crops. Is a society built on non-genetically modified crops sustainable or not? So that's an interesting question. I think that genetically modified will bring about the possibility to have more productivity, to feed more people. So if we consider society and the economy, then we realize that genetically modified can become an important part of the solution. So it's one way that you can read this difference. So of course, this is calling for the one of the big issues that we have in popular discourse in particular, which we've all encountered. It's this notion of greenwashing, right? We've all seen some ads or things where we're like, oh my God, do they really call this green? This doesn't make sense, right? So here's some little tips about greenwashing. So for instance, greenwashing is often going to be very vague in the way it describes the benefits of the product. And that's a good idea for you to sort of watch it with a little bit of a skepticism. Often they will make irrelevant claims. Sometimes, having a green package for something really, really wasteful otherwise would be an example of how they can make irrelevant claims. So for instance, the branding, which include the natural packaging, for instance, making the product packaging green, but not making the product inside green is one example of misdirection. So some of the ways people have been trying to solve this is by having more accountability in the space, by putting, for instance, some certifications or labels that require people to actually vet certain things by true metrics that you can quantify. And some of the ways people have been doing that is to say, okay, if you want a green label, so in Europe they have a lot of green labels that are functioning this way, where you have to fulfill a number of criteria, and it is evaluated by a third party that has no commercial implication into your business, and that's a good way to sort of make sure that your product is green. So this is an example of that. These are some examples of people who have been practicing greenwashing. So I think some are pretty evident here of some of the tips that we mentioned earlier. So this is a car that is thirsty for adventure, not gas. But of course, we all know that this car is driving on a lot of gas. So this is really a ridiculous claim. This is bottled water that is coming from the Fiji Islands and shipped across the globe. So obviously it has huge costs associated with transportation, but it's still making some green claims based on the purity of the water because it's coming from the Fijian rainforest. But yeah, again, it's not really green. You have some green claims made by plastics, but you have to look into this a bit more because this is PLA. We're going to talk about a bit more about this week. It's not truly biodegradable under natural conditions. So there are some claims here that are not fully substantiated. And this is a bottle of plastic that is made of polyethylene that is plant-based, but it's still not going to be biodegradable. So is it truly green? And finally, an example here of a beverage that is using petrol-based flavoring agents, and we'll put a picture of citrus here, but it's not coming from real citrus, right? So again, visual cues here are not telling you. Another myth is the sustainability is not too expensive. So in fact, what we find is that sustainability and expenses is a very interesting space. So what we understand is that most of the times when we have more sustainable ways, it's actually going to cost less. So in the long term, your process is going to come with real economic benefits, right? But the problem is that there's an upfront cost. So put it very simply, you have you want to develop a new process. For instance, in this case, so a way to look into this is, for instance, the development of renewable energy, such as solar, wind, and batteries. These are new technologies that initially didn't have a lot of the benefits of, say, petrochemicals because they'd only been recently developed. So all the economy of scale, the economy you can have because you've been running the process and know how to reduce costs via better engineering, via better practices, all of this stuff has not happened. So initially, the costs are very high of making this. Of course, they're going down quickly, and now we are at a stage where some of the costs start to look more like what's coming from petrochemicals or petro energy, but it took time. So these upfront costs coming at the beginning because of the cost of innovation, the cost of implementation, the cost of training, the designing, and so on, was there. So what this seems to indicate is that you have a better system from an economic standpoint here, but initially you need to pay more money. So this is what the economists call the barrier to an economy of scale. This means that you need to find ways to subsidize these things one way or the other so that you can push this innovation, so that you can get faster the benefits of the less costly development. Another way to look into this is to talk a little bit about this valley of death. So one of the big difficulty, which is also associated with this higher upfront cost, is that when you look at the process of making the discovery all the way to actually implementing it, You start with the discovery at the university or the government level, and you have usually some funding that is happening there because governments will fund research, universities will receive money. But then when you start to scale up, and this is what some of the things that I was presenting to you earlier, when you start to do more scale up, you can still get some money, but at some point, as you're trying to go higher and higher in scale, it becomes more and more difficult to find investors to believe in you. And the money you need to do these scale ups is higher and higher each time because you need to do something bigger and bigger every time. And then eventually, if you survive that and you validated that your process works as you go to the scale that makes sense, then you start to have the private sector saying, "Hey, I'm interested. I'm going to put money on that. I'm going to be the first to build it. I'm going to be the first to make it and sell it." And now you have a commercial process. But what's the problem is this gap in between the two when you didn't have a lot of funding and a lot, unfortunately, of great innovations died in what we call the valley of death in the middle of that. So you can actually trace a lot of that to computers, cars, EV batteries, solar energy, and so on. They all go this type of domain. Another thing is sustainability is not lowering our standard of living. So I think that it's really interesting to really understand again that innovation and breakthrough, they usually don't start at zero, but they substitute, you can actually at the beginning just substitute or improve existing products. So for instance, you have a pesticide, it's having some issues, you can replace it with a biopesticide. You're still going to have some problems, but you are making some small improvements, already reducing your impact. And that will allow you to potentially later go to better innovations, such as, for instance, stop using pesticides, but using better agricultural practices to prevent the pest to come in the first place. So innovation plays a key role for sustainable living and is already a major economic engine. So if you think about the Internet of Things, automated integration system, plant genetics, pharmaceuticals, and so on, what you realize is that a lot of the new innovations are actually going to make our lives better, not worse. So we should see sustainability as well as a way to improve our lives. And but sometimes we will not be able to do things exactly the same way. So I think there is still the need for people to realize that we will need to adapt a bit our standard of living so that we can make things much easier and much faster. For instance, sometimes we ask to stop using plastic bags and maybe we can use reusable bags. That's a bit of a pain. We need to change the way we're doing things, but this is a small change and the benefits are big. So we should try to adapt to this change. So is it going to make our life worse? No, it means our life is going to be a bit different. So with that, it's taking us to this idea that if we want to make a healthy, balanced society, we need to understand this again, this balance between the environment and the economy. If we favor too much on the environment, we might actually hurt the economy and have some issues. Whereas if we favor the economy over the environment, we know that the focus on profit can lead us to actually really harm our environment and eventually also harm our economic capacity. So it's this balance between the two that's really important to achieve. I'm trying to be mindful of time. I don't want to go overboard. Right? Okay.
Yes, we have to.
Oh, I see. So, so another aspect is that often people think that sustainability is going to be driven by consumer choice. So we should expect you to be making the right choice all the time, always picking the greenest option you have. So some of the ideas that people had originally that sure, we're going to make greener products. And for sure, people are going to be willing to buy them, even if they cost more money because it's green. And I think we all know that it's not really working that way, right? For a number of reasons. One, you don't really know what's green. No, you go to the supermarket You go buy a bowl of rice, you go buy sneaker shoes, like we've had the discussion over lunch about sneakers. Uh, how can we make that yes? It's not possible, right? So in some areas, people have developed metrics to try to allow you to make a difference. So I don't know about Indonesia, but when I go buy a new fridge, I can go and I can look at the consumption, energy consumption of each fridge, and I can make the choice to buy the one that has a reduced consumption. And this is usually the choice that I make because I don't want to pay high electricity bills. But is everybody making the same decision? I don't know. And again, most of the products we buy will not have these types of decisions. Another point is the cost. Often the option that is more that is better in terms of sustainability may cost a little bit more money, and people may not always have the means to pay more for the things. So it's not always true. So the grassroots movements and the consumer choice can be helpful, and they have been used for sure to initiate change, innovation, and demand. Ultimately, I think that, but this is not going to be sufficient, I think. And we've seen this repeatedly. Often the people who are actually driving this change are a small part of the population. There are people who know, who read a lot, who will have the time and also the economic means to make this choice. But the bulk of the people, I think we now see that it's not really happening. But what can happen though is that these few people who are really vocal, they may be influencers, they may have different kinds of ability to have a political power out there, that will convince the governments to pass policies and reforms. And I think this is the mechanism by which one of the mechanisms by which this can happen is that the national and international policies and reforms, such as curbing CO2 emissions or chemical pollution, will actually happen via the central authority that can initiate the change. So some of the ways with which this happens is via environmental government regulations, tax credits, taxes, or standards that can drive change and innovation. So I'll give you one example. For instance, in Canada, we have a tax on carbon, which has been designed in a way to put a price on carbon, put a price on all the consumption of carbon, whether this is you putting gas in your car or a company emitting CO2 in their plant, or even a farmer emitting CO2s because their cows are emitting methanes. So that's a part of the thing that is taken into account. And everybody pays a tax, and this is an incentive for everybody to have better practices because then they pay less tax if they emit less tomorrow. So that's one mechanism by which this can happen. One of the drawbacks of that, we have to be mindful about this, is that these take a lot of time. Governments take time to do that because sometimes some of these policies are not very popular, and governments, they want to be reelected. So sometimes they have issues with that. And this is exactly what we know in Canada. We've had some of these carbon tax for, I think, 10, 15 years in some provinces. And now the government is probably going to not be reelected based on the polls, and maybe this carbon tax will be removed by the next government. We don't know, but this is some of the program that they have. So this is to tell you that there's also uncertainty because some laws can happen and can go, and then it changes the dynamic. But anyway, overall, some of the things that we see is that the governments have a huge impact, and hopefully if we can convince them, they will help do this transition. Another great example is the REACH thing that happened in Europe. So REACH is this law that was passed by the European Union mandating that all companies have a full list of all the chemicals and all their products. So they asked everybody, selling toys, selling fridges, selling cars, you need to tell me all the chemicals in every part of all the things that you sell. This created massive panic when it happened because companies had no clue what was in their products. They just didn't know. Because now the economy is so divided into the makers of the stuff and the builders from the small parts that and lots of intermediates in between, that they completely lost track of what was the composition of each of the elements inside the products. So this created, and it was just implemented in Europe, but it trickled into virtually all companies around the world, because everybody wants to sell in Europe, having to do these inventories. So then it created a lot of business around how am I going to list all the things that I have, how I'm going to be able to trace the chemicals from one product to the next, and so on and so forth. So this is another example of how governments have had a big impact. And by doing that, people realized that they had some toxic compounds in some toys or whatever. And this has triggered then change in the composition of substances. So there are other concepts and sustainabilities that I wanted to walk you through a little bit. So before diving into too much chemistry, we're going to look into some other concepts that are also common into sustainability. So, sorry about this. The first concept is circular economy. Who's never heard about circular economy here? Yeah, everybody has heard about circular, right? Yeah. In fact, you heard this in the speeches of your ministers this morning. They all discussed about going from linear to circular, right? So this is really something that starts to trickle down to even the popular discourse, right? So the idea of circular economy is that what we want to do is to have a model in which all the resources of the production are coming from the waste of something else, so that we can, in fact, eliminate any waste generation and also stop using the resources from the planet. So what we do with that is that we get greener products because they tend to be non-toxic and have a longer life and be recyclable. We have cleaner productions because we no longer need to rely on resources. We have better services because now there's an incentive in having our products have a longer life. So, your iPhone here will last much longer. So that's good because you're not going to buy a new one so often, right? You have better collection at the end of life that you can deconstruct and remanufacture, recycle waste and reuse resources so that you can remake your green products. So this is kind of the idea. It also focuses on the concept of the function. So here I have an object in my pocket. It's a piece of metal with plastics and things. But it's more than that. It's something that serves a purpose. I can contact people, right? So it's important. The function is contacting people. It used to be that I contacted people with a phone that was at my home. Now it's a phone that I have in my pocket. So the object changes, but the function remains the same. So what we have to focus on is more the function rather than the actual object. And this leads to people thinking about economies of sharing. So for instance, you want to drive around, but maybe you don't need to own the car. Maybe you can use car sharing services so that we don't need to construct as many cars. We can construct fewer cars and people will share the cars. Leasing, reusing, these are the same ideas as well. Repairing, refurbishing. So these are some of the ideas behind the circular economy. Central to the circular economy idea is this notion of eliminating the waste, right? So if you think about the end of life of a product, at the end of life, you dump the product and you forget about it. And what happens to it is that more likely it's going to be landfill. And that has a huge cost. So this particular triangle here has at the basis, the wider it is, the more negative impact it has on the environment. So you see here the disposal has a huge impact. It's really big. But if you start to, instead of just disposing it, try to incinerate it to recover the energy, you lower a little bit your impact. But better than this, if you manage to recycle it, you're better. And if you don't even recycle it, but you reuse it multiple times, you're better. And if you use less stuff, you're even better. And if you don't use it at all, you're even better. So it's really all of these concepts will help moving toward the circular economy. So especially circular economy will start here when you recycle, reuse, and reuse. And below that, you don't have circular economy, but a linear economy instead. So another view of this is from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. If you're interested in this, actually teachers in this room, go see the Ellen MacArthur Foundation website. It's a fantastic resource for nice infographics about especially circular economy, but also plastic use, plastic pollution. There's some really interesting stuff there. And this is an effort to try to sort of look into the flows from the perspective of the resources and from the on the left-hand side and from the perspective of the economy and the market on the right side. So in a circular economy, what happens is that you can use all of these different ways to recycle your material and try to reuse it. So this is more for the carbon side of things. So collecting things and deconstructing them via different methodologies that can implicate chemical extraction, biological extraction, farming, so that you can remanufacture new parts and make services. And this is more on the inorganic side of things, trying to recycle material and products and maintain them by repairing them, reusing them or distributing them, remanufacture them, or recycling them. So these different ideas around. So this is for so this is for the renewables, so typically carbon, and this is for the finite materials, typically metals, metals, phosphorus, other elements like that we need for us. So let's think about the circular economy. So the circular economy would be really interesting because it will allow us to conserve the resources that we have, conserve the elements, and reuse them. It benefits the environment because we stop extracting, so we stop mining, which we know is a super important source of pollution. It will bring economic opportunities. You will start to develop people who do repairs as opposed to selling things. And we know that this is really bringing back jobs in communities. It will enhance resilience and bring a lot of social benefits. But it is complicated to implement. And there are a number of things for which we do not have a solution developed today. It's often hard to scale, so you need to do it at a smaller scale, which often means it's a little bit more expensive. There are people saying that it can limit technology and design. I don't necessarily fully agree with that because I think that you have to be quite creative when you do this, and I think there's still lots of spaces for creativity and innovation in that space. But it also requires people to change their mindset. We live in a society where it's so much fun to dump things and buy a new one that we will really have to fight against that. And some other limitations, I mean, some people say, okay, if we do that, we have to stop mining today, but then where are we going to find the new resources we need to keep growing? Because we have a growing population, right? So these are some of the challenges that you can have. But if we were already limiting to today, I mean, I think that this is an argument that I hear, but I'm like, okay, let's use all the ways we have today, and then we'll deal about the fact that we still need to mine a little bit at the end later, because it would already be so much better than what we do today, that I think we will have lots of benefits in doing. There are also some issues with materials that we don't want to recycle. So there are technologies right now we know based on toxic materials or materials that can cause a lot of issues. So we want to be sure that we will collect them and potentially dispose of them because they're toxic in a way that is safe. But we're really far from that today because in terms of recycling, for instance, which is not ideal, but already go in there. We only do that at the scale of 9% globally. This is considering, or what? This is considering the plastic waste, for instance. If recycling systems or supply chains would be adequate, even single-use plastics would be sustainable. But unfortunately, today we're really far from it. So we need to develop more technology around this. So some of the ways that we are looking into this question is really to so some of the issues with this circular economy is really the addiction that we have to single use. So if we think about it, when you get a product, we often use this saying cradle to grave. This is talking about from the resource extraction all the way to the end of life product. In single-use plastic, the use of the material, which is going to be here, only lasts sometimes for a few minutes. So if you imagine here our single-use bottle that we have here for our water, I don't know, it was maybe created 6 months ago, this plastic bottle. You had to extract materials, you had to transport them, ship them. These processes, they take days, weeks. We had to manufacture it. So again, we're talking about weeks to months. And how long are we going to use it? Maybe an hour, and we're done. This notion of scale is just really interesting, how we make so much effort for something that's only going to be used minutes in our lives. This is really crazy. One of the ways with which you can actually start to make progress is to try to measure things. Measuring is really important because if you start to measure things, you can start to have a conversation. You can start to say, this is more, this is less, or I disagree with your number. I want to revisit this number. Quantifying things helps scientific discussion, concrete discussion to go beyond this greenwashing that we discussed earlier. And one of the big tools that people are using for that is life cycle assessment. So what we do in life cycle assessments is we are using a methodology that is internationally standardized. So this is really important because it means that if you do an LCA here in Indonesia, you can go talk to a colleague in Germany and they're going to listen to you because you have the same methodology. So you can compare things, you do it together, and you have the numbers to claim what you say is true. So this is a big power of LCA. It quantifies all the relevant emissions and resource consumption and the related environmental and health impacts. It will also measure resource depletion, and all of that, it will come up in the LCA in the form of impact for these different factors, these different problems. So in the life cycle assessment, we consider the full cycle of the product. So we consider from the natural resources all the way to the end of life, which could be incineration, landfilling, and hopefully recovery, right? You may do LCA on only portions of this, still called LCA. We're going to talk about this. It's in the definition of what, when you do an LCA, you need to define what is going to be the boundary limits. But the concept of LCA is one in which, in general, you will start by this bigger picture. And if you have to restrict it later, you can do that. It's possible. But it's really trying to encompass this entire life. So there are two attributes that make LCA distinct and useful as an analytical tool. It will consider the whole system and the total product life cycle. And it is also a presentation of trade-offs among multiple environmental issues. So we started this talk by saying, oh, we have these 9 planetary boundaries, remember? So we need a measure that will allow us to measure these different. So in fact, in LCA, we have more than 9, but they will fall into the categories of these 9 potential problems, in addition as well to health issues. We're going to talk about that. But the idea here is to be able to have a framework in which you can start to compare the different impacts on these different things and start to make, well, informed choice. Is it going to be easy? No. It's not going to replace the fact that you need to make a choice, each of about the future thought. But it is going to help you because you're going to have a way to compare things with actual numbers. So LCA is quantitative, right? It will give you actual values. One thing you need to pay attention to, though, is that although it's quantitative, it's not absolute in the sense that the data that you use for that is never perfect. It's nothing is free in life, right? Nothing works perfectly, and LCA is amongst those things. LCA is based on databases that are not perfect. For instance, you have databases of toxicology to assess the toxic aspects of different products. Well, some toxicology has not been done on certain times. Just no scientist ever did, the test to understand how toxic they were. So when this happens, you put a hole in that database and you say, oh, I don't have that. So then there are ways with which the LCA can still proceed, even if you have a hole in some places. But again, it gives you this idea that it's not perfect. Certain things have not been measured and still need to be measured. So that's one of the limitations that you have to do. And this is why sometimes LCAs come with actually indices of reliability that are actually a notion related to how available the data is on this particular line. Okay, so how do you do that? So the phases in the LCA are described here. So what you do first is you say, this is my goal, this is my scope. So I want to know how, so one LCA I know about is, I want to know how green beef production in Canada is, for instance. So that's one LCA that I know has existed because I knew someone who worked on that. And this is the goal that they had. So I want to measure the impact of beef production in Canada. So that's your goal. Your scope is going to be, okay, it's in Canada, it's in farming, it's comparing maybe 3 or 4 provinces in Canada or the entire Canada. So this is your scope, right? Then what you start to do is, so you have always a step of interpretation. So trying to say, okay, is the scope well done? Do you want to scope it a bit differently? Then you're going to actually start to define better the limits of your system. And we're going to talk about that in a second. So you need to go from the goals to actually translate it into something that's understandable in a framework of an LCA. Then you do your inventory analysis. So looking at the data, fishing the data, bringing it back and make the big calculation that will allow you to make your impact assessment. And every step of the way, you have to interpret to make sure you're doing things the right way. And you have documentation for that. So I was mentioning to you that all LCAs is happening via some standardized method that are regulated by ISO standards. And you have to follow them if you want to do right. It is beyond the scope of this particular workshop to teach you an LCA in full, but I'm going to give you a few examples here and a few notions that hopefully will give you a bit of a sense of what this is. So I have identified 3 things that I really like to talk about when I talk about LCA. What you want to do here is you want to measure the footprint of something across its life cycle. But before you do that, you need to define these 3 things really well. So the first one is the functional, and this is understanding what you are measuring. So when you are putting together an LCA, it's very important to understand that you want to be able to compare things for one another. And often the solutions that people have are difficult to translate from one thing to the next. So here is an example of what this could look like. So here you have a counter. This is your kitchen counter. And you want to clean that kitchen counter so that you have no bacteria growing on it, right? Something we all want to do in our kitchen, right? And you go to a company and the company says, I have 2 solutions to offer you. Or you have two companies. One offers you one solution, the other company offers you another solution. The first company that tell you, I am going to sell you a spray, and you need to apply the spray once a day. And in order to clean 1 meter square of your counter, you're going to need to apply daily a 10 centimeter cube of material of your spray, right? So every day, 10 centimeter cube is going to be spent. On the other side, the second company says, oh, I have a better solution. I'm going to paint it. I'm going to use a coating that I will apply. And for 1 month, you'll have nothing to do. 1 month, your counter is going to be your props. I invented it. Really smart. This is cool, right? Because you can limit how much you do. And for that, you need 30 centimeters square of material. Okay, so these are the two options that you have. So you see, if you have these two companies, you can take the liquid that they sell in a bottle, or the paint or the liquid, right? And you can calculate the impact of 1 liter of each liquid. But that's not going to give you the true LCA, because what you're trying to do is not to buy liquid. You're trying to disinfect your counter. So what matters is not the actual volume. It's actually the disinfection. So your functional unit in this case is disinfecting 1 meter square of countertop for 1 month. That's your functional unit. So when you're going to do your LCA, what you're going to do is you're going to compare functional units for company A versus functional unit for company B. And what this means is that my functional unit is 300 centimeters square per functional unit of this liquid. That is because I use 10 centimeters square per 30 days for my month, right? Everybody follows me here? And my functional unit here now is 30 centimeters square because I only use it once a month, right? So that's a functional unit. Another thing that's important in a life cycle assessment is the boundaries. So you want to understand what you're going to look at in your material, in your process, sorry. So this is the whole process that you have from the resource extraction, refining, commodity chemical manufacture, fine chemical manufacture, consumer product manufacture, distribution and sales, use, disposal or recycling, and then hopefully you can go back in refining if you do a good recycling here. Okay, so that's your whole life cycle. Now what you can decide to do is, and for each of these are going to, you're going to have inputs and outputs. And for each of them, you're going to have to measure the impact of these inputs and outputs. You can decide to do this for the whole cycle. So this is what we call cradle to grave. So this idea of from the infancy of the chemical to its death, it's a cradle to grave. This is where it's coming from. You can do what's called cradle to gate. So that is everything from the mining all the way to the end of the plant where you sell the chemicals. It's called cradle to gate. You can also have, don't think I have all of them, but there are others that are there. There are some that we called gate to gate. So this is when we look only at the manufacturer. We also have what's called cradle to cradle. This particular one that is units back. So these are some good systems as well that you can use. And finally, there's a third concept, which is what we call allocation. So here's the question. Here's the problem. You are extracting resources and you make one product out of it. So that's easy. All of the impact of your process, you're going to attribute it to your one product. But sometimes you make several products out of this one process. And this is happening in particular when you try to do circular economy and you want to use waste as a resource. You remember my example of the crustacean waste? The first purpose of fishing crustaceans to eat. so you can make food. But then if I start to use waste for it, I'm creating a second product, the same process. So now comes the question of allocation. How do you allocate the impact of your process to these two products? So this is an example. This is a soybean peel. From the soybean, we're going to make soy meal, which is going to be sold as animal feed, or we're going to make soy oil that is going to be sold to us, to cook, right? So what happened in this particular case is that for the production of these fields, there were emissions that were calculated, CO2 emission, SO2 emission, and NO3 emissions. And these are emitted per kilogram of soy that is grown in this field. And now what you need to do is you need to attribute the emission to the soy meal and to the soy oil. And in this case, they decided to attribute it as being 60% for the soy oil and 40% for the soy meal. We could discuss how they did that. Maybe they found that maybe you can use it based on the cost, on the price. So the economic values, how you make the attribution. You could have other factors that come in as well. But that's something very important. And it does have an impact because you can go from a system that you can really change actually an interpretation of an LCA by changing these particular allocation. This is also showing you how waste used as a resource is really key because it's going to lower the impact of the product you make when you start to use the waste right away because you can do this allocation. So it's really something that is quite interesting. And now I'm going to finish with a little question for you. So here's my problem. I want to pack some things to ship to someone, and I have two choices. I can use styrofoam here, right? Or I can use popcorn, right? As a material to use for the packaging, right? This is interesting. This is fun. We don't do that usually, right? So styrofoams are coming from petrochemical, right? So, and popcorn, they're coming from corn, that's grown in the. So now show of hands. Who thinks that the styrofoam is greener than the popcorn to be used as a package for packaging here? So who thinks the styrofoam is greener? Raise your hand. Yeah. Okay, styrofoam is greener. Matt thinks it's greener. You think it's greener? You think it's greener? Okay. Yeah, you've seen the slide, so you can't play. I have one here, two here. Okay, so we're like 10 people. Okay. So who thinks it's a popcorn? Yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 over there. Okay, so we have a small majority, I would say, for the styrofoam. Okay. So let's see. Okay, so we've done an assessment by kilogram of materials. And when we look at the kilogram of materials, we find that the polystyrene impact is bigger than the popcorn impact. So polystyrene wins. Is that right? Well, in fact, it's not true because here I looked at the kilogram, but is it the right functional unit? What would be a better functional unit, guys? Yeah, I have the answer here. So what is the good functional unit here? Is it the weight of my pebbles? What are you trying to do? You're trying to package stuff, right? So you need to fill your box. So what's a good functional unit here? Volume. Thank you so much. And now if you do it by volume, now the impact of the popcorn is higher. Why? Popcorn is more heavy than the popcorn is heavier than the styrofoam, right? So obviously the styrofoam for a lower mass is going to occupy more volume, and thus when you do your calculation now, the impact is lower, right? So popcorn, you were right. Congratulations to the 6 who voted for popcorn. Yeah. Right? So this is really an interesting example, I think, to you to showcase to you this importance of functional units to make the calculation, right? And also it's essential um, to define it, because otherwise you can see how you can completely flip your conclusion one way or the other. Yeah. And finally, should we use food as material? I don't think so. But anyway, that's a different that's a different thing. So sustainability concepts and solutions are powerful, and if used correctly, they can have a profound impact. After the break, we will dive into the tools to achieve sustainability, which we call green chemistry. So now I think we can open for a few questions. If you want to have a debate about that, sustainability, circular economy, planetary boundaries, let me know. I'm here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Audrey, for the lovely presentation. Okay, so we will continue with the Q&A session. We have questions here, maybe from the room and also from the Zoom. So let me read you the question briefly. So this is from Bapak Hubert Widyastono. So he has several questions. So the first one is, what is the role of green transformation to achieve TBL, the triple bottom line? And then what will be the essence of chemistry, entrepreneurship to meet green chemistry and TBL in terms of company performance? And lastly, only two questions. Yes. Yeah.
Okay, maybe I'll ask you to read the second again, but
Yeah.
I'll start with the first. So, a very good question. What is the role of green chemistry in achieving the triple bottom line? So, it's a difficult question. I think that if you look at green chemistry and the 12 principles, a number of them pertain to more than just the environment. So in green chemistry, the notion of health is very important, and the notion of environment is very important. So about the different principles, you have a number of principles around toxicity or accident reduction. So that really speaks for a better society, processes, chemical processes that will lead to less accidents, less pollution, less toxicity to humans. That's directly impacting the society positively. And of course, there's a lot of green principles around the environment too, which is just like the reduction of waste, the reduction of pollution, the use of renewables, and so on and so forth. So I think that green chemistry tackles, I think, really nicely, again, through its definition of reducing harm to the environment and human health. It tackles directly the notion of society and environment. Where it's linked to the economy is that often by reducing all of these impacts, you can also make a more profitable economy. We discussed a little bit some of the barriers with upfront cost. But it's now established that a lot of green chemistry processes are have better economic parameters in the long run. So I think that this is how you can achieve the triple bottom line. Do you mind reading the second question again?
And the second question is, what will be the essence of chemistry entrepreneurship to meet green chemistry and TPL in terms of company performance?
The essence?
Yeah. Will be the essence of chemistry entrepreneurship. So maybe like people in startups, what would they need to do to achieve the green chemistry and TBL in terms of company?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think it's a question that a lot of us are still trying to address. So there are lots of startup companies developing more sustainable processes. I think that the challenges that we find are linked to this valley of death that we discussed earlier.
The gap.
So the gap between funding that you can get at the earlier stage of research and innovation, and then investment dwindling as you start to scale I think to me this is the biggest challenge that people have been trying to address in this field, and for which there's no perfect solution, unfortunately. But we're all trying to do that. I'm sorry, I don't find the slide, but you remember the gap between the two.
Okay, I think that's the question from Hubert. Is there any questions in the room? Please. Silakan ya.
Okay, thank you. Hello, my name is Natasha. The question is in terms of green energy and sustainability. We will face greenflation, that is inflation that caused by energy transition from commercial energy to clean and green energy. And the question is, what can we do to minimize the impact of greenflation in the industry and the society? Thank you.
You guys are asking really great questions and very difficult ones. So, yeah, so I think you're right that a number of clean energies remain more expensive today, and that there might be energy inflation associated with that. But I think that you also have to consider other factors too. So the development of clean energy is also a way for a number of countries to develop geopolitical independence over, oil or other energies that are globalized, that have caused a lot of issues for them in terms of predictability of the price. So that, because in economy, you have the price that is a problem, but then you have the predictability of the price over time. It's another question. So it's not clear to me that you cannot have some great benefits in actually stabilizing the price, even if it's at a slightly higher level, locally in different communities in different countries. Another thing is that it's also predicted that the cost of renewable energies are going to continue to go down over time. So you may reach a point where this greenflation is actually no longer really a greenflation. And also, I think another aspect too is that the reason why legacy energies are less expensive is because we don't price the impact that they have on the environment. So this is where carbon tax, for instance, is coming in, is that it's one mechanism by which you start to say, yeah, you're emitting CO2, you're not paying for that, and yet it has an impact because of climate change, because of health, because of, we don't make polluters pay for the hundreds of millions of people every year who die from air pollution coming from the use of petro energy. So I think that what the tendency you see is that more and more we're gonna find a way to price that, and then once this is priced in, I can tell you that the benefit is going to be there because this greenflation is going to go away. But is it going to happen tomorrow? I don't know. This is really based on how governments are going to be able to implement that, and it's difficult. I don't know what the future will be. I hope it will happen, but because I think it's the only true way to make the economy fair to green technology is to find a mechanism by which polluters pay the pollution that they produce.
I agree. I agree. Because I also understand, because my background is in geothermal energy, and we're looking at context of energy. That's what you say. Like maybe at the end project, when we talk about fossil fuel, yes, the technology is there. It's cheaper in terms of economic, but in the long-term scale and also the effect of health. Yeah, the one that you said, air pollution. We didn't put account of how many people are having health issues like respiratory issues, and also the environment effect of mining and everything. So that should also be accounted. And again, to put a price tag on it, and that will make it more fair to compete between those two. That's for one example, if I can say. But again, it has to be a collective, I think, yeah.
Yeah,
All
completely.
sectors.
And I mean, we are having this discussion last night actually, and when it will happen, but it will happen in ways we don't even envisage. I mean, one thing that is happening right now in the US is that because they have so many natural disasters that are happening one after the other, entire regions now in the United States cannot be insured. So it means that the house people have from one day to the next, you cannot insure it anymore. So if the roof falls because of the wind, no one will pay you a new roof. It's on you because there's no insurance that will agree to insure your house anymore. And now people are really freaking out because it's an entire way of thinking, of seeing the world, that you have a house and if something, and you pay every month for some insurance. And then if something happens, somebody will come and fix it for you. Now people are freaking out because this is going away for them. So this is a mechanism by which cost is coming back from the back door and knocking at your door and say, hey, you gotta pay because there's nothing as free lunch.
Adding another clause. Yeah, adding another clause in the agreement. Okay. Is there any other questions? Right now it's 40:38 and we're going to enter break. If there is no other question. Any? Oh, there's another one.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes.
We continue what we discussed from Natasha questions. Maybe you can share with us what happened and what your government did to, to escalate the gap, right? I mean, to from the academic institution to industrial sector, like private sector, how to make this kind of green innovation could be able to realize in a commercial scale. Maybe you could share some insights.
I don't think so it's recording. I'm not sure Canada is the best example for that. I actually think the US and Europe are doing better in that front. So maybe I should talk a bit more about that. So the things, in general, the things government will do to try to reduce that is to try to develop investments that will address this critical time between the innovation and the commercial stage. So this valley here, they will try to have agencies that they will fund to select companies and give them funding at that moment that is so critical. So I can tell you that the government of Quebec, my province in Canada, they have developed a new agency to try to do that. And some of the fundings that we're getting right now, that we're trying to get, we applied for funding. I don't know if we're going to get it, but we applied to this new agency to try to get some funding to continue to scale our process. And I don't know if it's going to work, but it is meeting this gap for us because at the next stage, we believe that we'll be ready to go to venture cap. So to now starting to go to the private sector a little bit. So this has been the effort really, moving forward for government is to try to find a way to target that gap and to fund companies at that moment. So of course they need a lot of money to do that. And they need to establish criteria to pick the right companies they're going to invest in. So that's the thing that is tricky and difficult. And what I saw my government do is that they're really trying to appoint some experts to be there at selecting those key companies to push them forward. So I think it's I think it's a virtuous thing to do. I think it's the right way to do it. Is it always working? I don't know. I mean, in Europe, I know that they've developed, for instance, different biomass related agencies that are doing that very specifically to try to make more bio-based products. And the bio-based industry in Europe is really going up because of that. So that's some examples that I know of.
Okay. So securing funding, right? Securing funding and finding the right players
And
to fill in the gap.
targeting this funding at this time is what I think is going to be critical.
And there's a lot of startups and companies filling the gap. That's happening in Europe and America.
So so for instance, in the bio-based industry, definitely this is happening in Europe, for instance, where companies are developing bio-based industry, for instance, based on funding they receive from governments that was targeted to that specific time. So it has saved companies, and companies that would have died 10 years ago now have been survived and eventually could get investments and then become commercial.
With the help, with the regulation from the government.
Yeah, with government. No regulation,
No,
but
no,
funding.
but
funding.
with the fundings.
Yeah.
And the fundings is from private sectors, right?
Yeah. So often it's like mixed actually, because the governments, they don't want to be the only one to pay. So often they have mechanisms by which you need some also industry partners, but they put a lot of the control.
What I know is in Canada, you have like very high carbon tax.
Yes.
Yeah.
So carbon
High
tax.
price.
So carbon tax, I know a lot about this because I'm a friend with the person who designed the carbon tax in Canada. And what's really interesting is that they did a lot of math initially to find the most efficient way to develop an incentive for reducing emissions. And they compared regulations to cap and trade to carbon tax. And they found that the carbon tax was by far the cheapest and the one that would save 3% of the GDP every year compared to the others, especially compared to regulation. So to say you're not allowed to emit more than whatever. And so this is why Canada went with that approach. So it's working now. It's been applied to the entire Canada. Several provinces did it before, like Quebec did it before. British Columbia as well did it first, actually. So they've had it for more than 15 years. I think British Columbia actually had it for a long time. But now the Prime Minister Trudeau has really poor polls, and in the next election, and very likely he's not going to be Prime Minister anymore. And the next Prime Minister said that he will get rid. So this is where governments is good, but when the government change, they can go back to hide it. So I don't know if it will happen, but there's a chance that federal carbon tax in Canada. That would be sad, I think, because I think it's powerful.
Okay, I think that's for the second session. Thank you so much. Again, from the speech though, from the talk that we had last night, it's to be hopeful, right? Optimistic, not optimistic, but hopeful. That's what we were discussing. I know sometimes the things, the regulation and everything, but again, we have to be optimistic and hopeful. I think that's the correct word. Yeah, Audrey, because I see that the society also is now open, to many changes, and they're dealing it with daily life. So I think that also gives hope, that more people are more aware and have more care, to the environment and to the sustainability, because it's now open and everyone is accessible to the knowledge. And I hope we can all be hopeful, hopeful in that context. Okay, so allow me to a little summarize about the talk that's been given by Audrey. So again, sustainability. I also use this in my class, that we do not inherit the future Earth from our ancestors, but we borrow it from our children. I totally agree with that, because that's the main context of sustainability. And also about the planetary boundaries, the 9 components. We've only been talking about greenhouse gas emissions, but again, there are other factors that are affecting our Earth, and that has to be included into the sustainability discussion. And again, as the data shows, that the world is exponential in exceeding the planetary boundaries. Like for the last 10, 15 years, you can see the graph is exponential. And it is because there is, again, an increase of population. So the ideal scenario is the economy should be embedded in society, and society should be embedded in the environment. That's the ideal way to go. And when we talk about green, the green aspect is focusing on technology that can produce less harm to the human health and environment. And also, we would like to say about the stigma about sustainability is expensive. When we talk about the long run, it is competing, it is able to compete with our current ways of life when we're doing the industry or we're doing business that can compete eventually. And we see that it's progressive. We can see that the technology is also emerging. And again, because the society also have gain more knowledge and openness and sustainability and green practices. And lastly, about the circular economy, when I grow up, uh, I've always heard about the 3R, reduce, reuse, recycle, and that's the context that we talk about circular economy, how we do not put an end life of our product, but we can also sustain and reuse and recreate, something, other products from that. And lastly, about the levelized cycle of analysis. And also, I also remember like in our society, yeah, in Indonesia, we have a saying, sandang, pangan, papan. Bener ya? Jadi primary needs. Nah, sekarang itu uh, that's basic needs of a human. You need sandang, pangan, papan. So it's food, uh, clothes, and housing, right? But now we also need education. We also need energy. That is allowing the community to thrive. And again, from the life cycle analysis, we can see that we can put a quantitative value of creating a product, and also we can define the goals. We can assess the impact of the environment. That would be a good way to go. To not only say, oh, this is bad for the environment, but how much, that's the quantitative aspect that we have to highlight. So I think that is all from the session of Audrey. Thank you again, everyone.